Welcome to Mental Fitness, the Gateway to Success podcast, providing business owners, leaders, and entrepreneurs with the 3 INs: insights, inspirations, and intentional actions. Delivered through monologues and dialogues, we address topics like leadership, productivity, time management, work-life balance, and challenges like stress, conflict, mental health, and much more. Please do not hold back from suggesting specific topics and guests you would like on this podcast. Greetings and welcome to this episode. I am going to shift gear in this episode, and I will elaborate on that in a moment why I'm doing that. This is episode 20 in this trial time of this podcast, which means I will have about 7 or 8 more of these podcast episodes, like 4 of these monologues and 4 with guests to go. Now, there is a lot of work going into putting these together, which I'm happy to do if they are bringing value. And if they're not, then it's just a waste of my time, and I don't really want to do that, obviously. So we will see when we get closer to that half year, and I will check in again to hear if people want more. If you already know by now that you want more of this, then please let me know in the comments below. So the episodes with my guests, which are, to no surprise, the most popular ones, I'm really enjoying those. And it is absolutely amazing to me, the openness that the guests I've had on so far, all of them, the openness they've had about sharing things, really personal things from their lives, and tremendous hardship, some of them. And then sharing this shift and the transformation that took place for them to come out the other side of that in a so much better way. And they are there, those guest episodes, to inspire. And it's to inspire through stories, to people's real stories from real life. Because I find myself, when I'm hearing stories of people that I can't relate to because it's just way too far up there, that does not inspire me as much as when I'm hearing stories of people more like everyday people going through life's trials and tribulations, and then finding ways of moving through that. So again, if you have stories that you would like to share, and come on to this podcast, there will be a few more guest episodes, so get in quick and just either comment or message me directly, and we can have a chat about that. And if it makes sense to both of us, then I'll have you on. Now, back to these episodes with just me. So far, there has been a lot of practical tools I've shared, which is part of what I do. And I love doing that. Again, sometimes we just need a little reminder or a little, oh, I hadn't thought about that. Oh, I'll try that out. There's little tools that can help us move forward in life. So nothing wrong with that. For the next few, since this is a trial, what I want to do is something entirely different, a different approach, like something that is, you could say, someone closer to my heart, because it is something that where my passion really lies in my life at this moment in time. And these things, this stuff is integral to me in my life at this moment in time. So it's something I can share and talk about in real life. So all the tools I've shared so far in these episodes are all things that I have used myself. So I'm not sharing things with people that I have read about in the book. It's stuff that I have done myself somewhere along the way and found useful. And then, as often, when you learn something that works for you and that you appreciate, that shifts things in your life, you just want to share with other people. So there's been a lot of that happening. However, on the other side of it, a lot of the tools that I'm sharing, I'm actually not using myself. Not because they're wrong or bad, but because they no longer work for me. But they all worked for me early on in my life, whether that was a year ago or 10 years ago or 20 years ago. And therefore, I'm sharing those again because different people listening to this will be in different places along their journey in their lives. So it's not that some tools are bad or wrong. It like all good tools are good, but they don't all work all the time for everyone. And the same for me. Some tools I used in the past just don't work any longer. And then I continue to look for new tools for myself. And what I want to do in this episode is share a little bit about some tools that I'm still using and still working with, whether I've used them for a long time or whether they are fairly new. And that's what I want to focus on in the last few of these episodes with just me. So some of these tools, in a way, that I'm generally not sharing with people. It's not because I don't want to share them. It is just that they're tricky and can be really tricky to share. Again, not right or wrong, but I have spent like thousands of hours in meditation. And I have done this personal spiritual growth work in my own life for 40 years. So when I discover something new, I of course don't want to go and share that. And often when I do that, people just look at me like I'm crazy. It's like just going over their heads. Like they can't grasp that. So it's like the second example of, say, a tennis coach who is coaching tennis at master level. The tools that that coach is using to take people who are already mastering the craft to improve on that and grow it even further are different tools than the tools you would use for a beginner or an intermediate. Which again, there's nothing right or wrong about that. It is finding the right tools that are matching people where they are at. So when I'm with my one-on-one clients, it's easy because I can then detect where they are at and ask some questions and share things and see how they take things on board so I can keep adjusting how I coach that person depending on where they are at. In these podcasts, I have no idea who you are. You may know me. I wouldn't even know that. So I do not know the level of awareness and practice and experience that you already have. So therefore, some of these things very easily can just be too much information or just can't comprehend that. So that's why so far I've mostly given reasonably practical tools like breathing tools and ways of discovering your life purpose and time management stuff and that. But as I said here, I want to do something different. And what I want to do is talk a little bit more about some personal stories and experiences from my life that are in my life at the moment and things that I am still working with in my own life. So in this episode, as you can see from the title, it's about buttons. So I'm sure you know the saying, I don't like people pushing my buttons, or people keep pushing my buttons, or my wife or girlfriend or husband just keeps pushing my buttons, or that colleague is just really pushing my buttons. So somewhere along the way, I can't remember when, in my journey, um, I I heard someone. I can't actually truly remember. Maybe I came up with it myself. It doesn't matter. But I heard this, I came across this sentence that said, if you don't like your buttons being pushed, remove the button. And it was like, huh? Of course. I mean, that would have to be the most logic and best solution to the button problem. And therefore, I started investigating that. And I want to share a little bit of that briefly with you here today. And show you a couple of ways that I did that, and I'm still doing because people are still pushing my buttons, and particularly some of the people close to me, like my wife. Um, and I will elaborate just a little bit more on that in a moment. So for me, there are two I see kind of again. I love simplicity. So there's two pathways I see that we can take um, in dealing with buttons. So the obvious thing first is if we want to deal with something, we must take time to understand that which we're dealing with. And in my experience, both from my own life and from the people I've met and worked with, most people seem to be more focused on changing things around them and other people and circumstances so their buttons don't get pushed. The only problem with that is that it doesn't work because the buttons will still eventually get pushed. And if it's not that button, then it's an other button. And then suddenly you discover you have a button that you never even knew you had somewhere along the way when a certain circumstance shows up. So therefore, trying to change the world around us to minimize button pushing for us is not a very effective way forward. A far more effective way forward is to go, okay, most things out there I can't actually truly do anything about. And then go, so what can I do? I can start looking at my buttons and learn more about my buttons. And just briefly, there are kind of three ways that buttons are being pushed. It is when we are judging things that are happening around us that we get into this reaction mode. So when we are in what I call a loop or in this reaction, that's a button being pushed. And there are three things like that, again, to keep it simple. One is circumstances. So circumstances can be the economy, it can be the weather, like circumstances of things, the environment that we're living in. So that can push our buttons. Then the one that are probably more common, definitely is for me personally, is other people's behaviors, whether it's drivers in the traffic or politician or my wife or the kids or anybody else. And then the last one is the judgment of ourselves, that we can actually push our own buttons by just thinking about things that we're worried about within ourselves or some shortcomings in that. So the judgment of circumstances, judgment of others, and judgment of ourselves are button pushers. And we all will tend to have one of those that are our primary one. For most people I work with, it's one of those two. For me, it's that one. My main one uh, is other people's behaviors. And in, I mean, none of them are good, but that one is particularly bad because changing the whole world to behave in ways that I think they should behave is just not going to happen. So with that, back to the two pathways that I took myself and that I can recommend for people to take when it comes to an investigation into your buttons and ways of dealing with those buttons. The um, the first one is to practice, whether you want to call it mindfulness or meditation or anything like that. It is essentially grow your mental fitness. So the more you grow that, the more you practice mindfulness, the more you practice being able to notice what is going on within you. That means when your buttons are being pushed, and let's just make it clear, my buttons are being pushed all the time, and I'm still reacting all the time. But there is a massive difference to the way it used to be. And that difference is that it doesn't last very long. In most cases, we're talking seconds, and then it's gone. Where many things could take for me hours or days, sort of going in this loop. So what I've discovered along the way is trying to find ways of not having my buttons pushed is a waste of time. Because when they're pushed, and then they react. And I have no choice in that in the moment because it happens in this lightning speed. But what I can practice is catching that and go, ooh, there was that button being pushed. Okay. Ha. Or suddenly I find myself at a driver and then, ha. Within seconds, it's like, huh, just let it go. Just let it go. But to be able to let it go, we need to practice. And it's not a black and white. It is the more you practice, the quicker you will get. And for me, the more I practiced over the decades, the quicker and quicker. So I still practice that to this day, every single day, through mindfulness and meditation practices, awareness practices, getting quicker and quicker at detecting to the point where even sometimes I can see, oh, something happened there that is just going to push my button. And that means I can even stop that button from being pushed through that recognition. So it is possible to get to that place where the buttons actually don't get activated. But mostly they just get activated, whether it's a driver, my wife, or anything else happening. So that's one pathway, and it's not one or the other. It's actually, I recommend both to get the best possible results. The other pathway is very different, very, very different. In this pathway, what we do and what I did was, okay, I want to understand this button thing. Where are those buttons? How do they work? What are the mechanics of buttons? So essentially what I did, I started meditating, if I can use that word, or I started mindfulness practice, awareness practices, where my focus was on the buttons themselves. So when a button got pushed and I wasn't driving a car and I had the space, I would then go, okay, there's a button. And instead of going, I don't like that, let me get out of that, take some deep breath, put a smile on my face, let it go. That driver's doing whatever they're doing, not my problem. And everything is fine. Instead of that, it's like, okay, let's go inside this button and investigate this button. And that for me really is what meditation is. Meditation is not just an awareness practice. Meditation means to investigate into. That's for me the raw meaning of the word. So just people say, I'm meditating on my breath. Absolutely. But in generally, they're not, in my view. They're just being aware of their breath, which to me is not meditation. Meditation is where we go deeply into the experience of breathing and investigating the breath itself. That's just my view. So for me, what I started doing was to investigate into these buttons so I could start understanding in more depth what the buttons are, and more importantly, how they work. What are the mechanics of them? And in that, there are a couple of fascinating outcomes for me in that. One again is this deep, profound understanding of how they work, which helps me in two ways. It helps me in my own life when they're happening, is that I can very quickly choose how I want to relate to this button at this moment in time, in what I find at that moment is the most useful way for me. But also the other part of that, it allows me as a coach to support other people because my buttons are my buttons, but the mechanics of how my buttons work is the same as the mechanics of how your buttons work. So therefore, if I know the mechanics of my buttons, I also know the mechanics of your buttons. Not the content, not the specific button, but the mechanics of the button itself. And therefore, I can support other people with deepening their awareness of that and therefore help them dealing with their buttons in whatever way they prefer to deal with their buttons. The other aspect of this, as going into the button, also means to actually go into the experience of having the button pushed. So if that means anger or frustration or anxiety, it allows me to then go inside that experience with no need to get rid of it. And then it becomes a gift for growth, a gift for learning. And this is exactly how I got rid of severe depression without psychiatrists, without doctors, without medication, simply through, at that time, years of practice of awareness. And then when that button in me got activated and I felt this deep darkness and this deep depression, my practice allowed me to then go inside that button and inside that experience until at one point I got deep enough into that, or deep enough, I say, down that rabbit hole till it vanished. It just disappeared in a flash and hasn't come back in my life. And this is like more than a decade and a half ago. So that is the power of doing that. But as I said earlier in the podcast, it's sometimes difficult to decide what kind of tools and what things to share because some of these things, this is not easy to do. And many people do not have enough practice of awareness to be able to do that kind of investigation, that kind of depth of meditation. Again, not right or wrong. It doesn't make me a better person than anybody else. All it is that it allows me in that area of my life to go deeper because one, that's what I'm passionate about. Two, that I've done it for 40 years. I cannot even not do it. It is just such a deep part of who I am. And then I made it, it's a great privilege for me to then be able to be in a position where I've made it my livelihood to share this with others in a number of different ways over the last 30 years. So my invitation to you, in short, is to get intimate with your buttons. And that's possibly one of the last things you want to do. But from my viewpoint, it is the quickest and possibly the best way of dealing with them. Because yes, we can take drugs, legal and illegal, that can kind of dampen those buttons or make it a little bit more difficult to push them. Or when they're pushed, they are not so intense. The problem with that is that it's not actually solving the underlying issue. And in order to do that, we need to be absolutely alert and awake. We need to be able to, in full consciousness, to go into these places and uncover. So as the saying with the onion, just keep peeling these layers of the onion. So my invitation in short is get intimate with your buttons because they are actually gifts. However freaking annoying they are actually gifts in our lives for personal and spiritual growth. Now you may wonder why the title of this podcast, how to push people's buttons, which is kind of different from what I just talked about. But in a roundabout way, it isn't. Because here's the thing. I'm gonna just give a statement and see how you react to that. Buttons wants to be pushed. I'll say that again. Buttons want to be pushed. You would have noticed other people, say, who are always like drama people, always drama, or people worrying a lot. It seems that they always find something to make a drama out of. They always find something to worry about, or they always find something to be angry about. Why? Do you really think they want to be angry and worried? No, they don't. But that pattern within them wants to. Otherwise, it wouldn't be there. And that is the button or the buttons. So then what buttons themselves want to do, not you, but your buttons wants to be pushed. They're like, hey, here's my button. Please, can somebody push this button? And then somebody pushes, and now I'm angry. And then there is a fulfillment in that, being angry in that moment. Or blaming somebody for something, like yelling at that bad driver. There is some excitement in that. And the button wants that to happen. And that can be extremely challenging for people to get their heads around. It took me a long time. Once I understood that, then it like obviously it's obvious to me. So therefore I know when I am reacting when my buttons are being pushed, I know that it's not me wanting those buttons to be pushed. It's the buttons themselves that wants to be pushed. And therefore, I can relate to that. I can relate to that differently. And then I can choose between those two pathways of go, nah, don't need to bother about that. And it's over. Or, oh, I'm going to dive a little bit into this one and see if I can get some clarity on what this is about. And then release that. And then it's a personal, spiritual growth opportunity. And that's where the gift is in that. So with that, tying that into the title of this podcast is when you stop allowing other people to push your buttons, people that are around you on a regular basis, at work, at home, those people's buttons are gonna get pissed off because they need your buttons to be pushed alongside with theirs. Other buttons need other people's buttons to have this community of buttons where our buttons are being pushed. And we can all blame the government, or we can all blame that person, or we can all be angry together or be anxious together. And the buttons are happy having a party. This just doesn't do anything of true value to us because we're just caught in that pattern in that moment. So therefore, people around you who are used to you reacting in a certain way to their behaviors expect you to keep doing that. They're counting on it. And then when you stop doing that, and you think they're going to go, oh, wow, oh, great, good on you. Mostly not. They're going to get really irritated or frustrated or whatever it is for them, which means when your buttons are not being pushed so much, or you're not reacting so much, or getting out of it quickly, that will push other people's buttons. Hence the title of this podcast. So if you want to push other people's buttons, remove your own buttons, because it is very difficult for other people to deal with people who do not have buttons to push, because we are so familiar with a world full of buttons. So it's an unfamiliar place. And then some people, and I've heard people say that to me, well, then I'm not gonna try and get rid of my buttons or deal with my buttons, because I still want to belong into this community of these people. And totally, I understand that. That's not me. And yes, I have lost friendships, particularly in the early days of this journey because of that. But I've also gained friendships that are at a much deeper and far more fulfilling for me in my life. So as we go on these journeys and we change, the people around us are likely to change as well. And if you're not up for that, don't do that. So with that, very last thought on this, of course, have to tie back to mental fitness. What has all this I've shared got to do with mental fitness? Everything. Everything. Because mental fitness, the tools I've shared with you that I use in my life, helps grow my mental fitness. If you use them, it will grow your mental fitness. That's one side of it. The other side is the higher your mental fitness is, the more effective you will be in dealing with your buttons. So mental fitness fits into this both ways. What was my invitation again? Meet your buttons. Get intimate with your buttons. And let me know. We said podcast today. I know it's very different to the other ones I've done. Is this what you want more of? Or do you want me to go back to the other ones? Or would you rather that I don't continue at all? Either way is, of course, fine. Please let me know. Thank you for tuning in to this episode of Mental Fitness, the Gateway to Success. If you have stories of how mental fitness has benefited you that you are happy to share, go to my website, mikael.nz, click on podcast and fill in the guest application form. If you want direct support from me utilizing my 40 years of mental fitness learning and practice, email me at coach@mikael.nz or message me on LinkedIn. Any feedback, review, share, follow, like, or any other good stuff is, of course, appreciated. Thank you for listening to Mental Fitness, the Gateway to Success podcast. I'm your host, Mikael Nielsen.